Hey everyone, the claim that I'm going to be responding to tonight is active video games are not a healthy substitute for regular physical activities and social activities. My opponent's secondary claims are: 1. Active video games are not rigorous enough to be a substitute for physical activities. 2. It keeps kids from their studies. And 3. It also influences children to be inactive. On his first point, that active video games are not rigorous enough to be a substitute for physical activities, the advocate does a good job of explaining how active video games do not exercise the muscles in the body enough. But on one hand, the last piece of evidence in this point that the advocate shares with us has some flaws. The piece of evidence was that the obesity rate in Japan was tested to be 20% 20 years ago, and now it is about 30%. Though the evidence is legitimate and up to date, the inference made that the reason why the obesity rate raised 10% because of this video games is illogical. Other factors such as fast food diets, eating habits, and exercising habits need to be considered. Other than that, this first point seems to only explain what is true, not really having an argument that active video games are not rigorous enough to be a substitute for actual physical activity, and I can't disagree with what is simply true. Now, the second point, that video games keep kids from their studies, the advocate continues on to explain a study done on how playing video games causes less time doing schoolwork and or reading. The study was 1,491 adolescents ages 10 to 19 were asked to complete 24-hour self-reported time use diaries during the 2002-2003 school year on one randomly chosen weekday and one randomly chosen weekend day. There are a couple of problems with this study. First off, the advocate's main claim deals with active video games, but this evidence refers to all types of video games, so the statistics don't support the main claim very well. Also, the study is weak in supporting the claim because it takes only a small portion of adolescents to represent our whole nation. It is outdated about 8 years, and also because the study is not very accurate. It only takes data from one random school day and one random weekend day over the course of a whole school year. Also in the same article the advocate used, which is from MedPage Today, researchers also noted that the time spent watching TV is 3 times as much as the time spent playing video games, showing us that the games don't play as large as a role as TV does in causing the decrease of studies. Which brings me to my counterclaim for this point, that watching TV plays a larger role in decreasing studies than playing video games. According to AC Nielsen Company, the average American watches more than 4 hours of TV each day, which adds up to 28 hours per week, or 2 months of non-stop TV watching per year. In a 65-year life, that adds up to 9 years being glued to the tube. Also in the same article, the percentage of households that contain at least one television is 99%, while the percent of U.S. households that play video games is only 65%. These stats alone show us that TV has the capability to play a much larger role than video games in causing poor academic performance. Lastly, the third point, that active video games influence children to be inactive, also has some flaws in the evidence and reasoning. One piece of evidence presented by the advocate was a quote from a staff writer, the founder of Green, who stated, "It's a way to try something new in a non-threatening environment, but really you ought to get outside and give it a try and have some real fun." The evidence is flawed because the person who's saying it is just a staff writer, and he doesn't have any professional expertise in the field. And the statement seems to be just an opinion, not based on any actual data or studies. The reasoning made from this evidence is also flawed. Though playing active video games may give one the opportunity to try something new in a non-threatening environment, it doesn't support the inference that it keeps kids indoors. In opposition to this point, my counterclaim is that it is the responsibility of the parents and the children to monitor the amount of activity he or she gets in order to stay active. It's not the responsibility of the video game to monitor how much outside activity a person gets. The parent should encourage outside activities such as participating on an athletic team or scheduling a certain amount of time playing video games and a certain amount of time spent doing outside activities. The game itself doesn't hold the responsibility of causing kids to stay indoors and be inactive. In conclusion, it is not questionable that the active video games are not a healthy substitute for physical activities. However, the claims that it causes obesity, poor academic performance, and children to be inactive are inaccurately represented. The effects of active video games are incorrectly made a bigger deal than they actually are in reality, and other major variables such as TV, eating and exercising habits, study habits, and personal responsibility needs to be considered. Thank you.
All right, you lay out the main and secondary claims pretty clearly. On the first point, it's mostly just an assessment that you're giving on this point as opposed to a response. There is a challenge to the Japanese research, and I think that you've got a reasonable press here that there might be other causality that's going on, that the inference that the advocate is presenting here is perhaps a bigger leap than is justified. And it comes down to the notion that there's not really a lot of controversy on the one thing, that it's not, that other things would be more effective. So I think that's a reasonable theoretical position to take on that point. On point number 2, again, the signposting is clear. You challenge the application of the study that is being presented here to the nature of the video games, and I think you need to explain that a little bit more. For instance, that the video games that were used in this research don't constitute the same kind of games that the advocate's talking about. An example or two would be helpful. The challenge on the grounds, because the statistical procedures are problematic. You don't really give us a reason why the use of a single day for the weekend and a single day for the week out of a year is inadequate, except that it just sounds inadequate to you, and I don't think that that's enough of a response. You need to show, for example, that a single day could be incredibly misrepresentative. Of course, the whole point of the randomization there is to make sure that we're getting something that's typical. I thought that your better point on this was the counterclaim on television, which is the best argument that you've got on this point. It's nicely developed. You've got some good statistical information on it, and you've got good reason to suggest that this is, in fact, a bigger contributor to the problem than the video games. Again, clear signposting on the third point. The challenge on the staff writer's opinion is okay, but I don't know that it's all that strong and it gets you much. I thought the counterclaim on responsibility is more applicable in a policy claim than it is in an issue of fact like this. So that's, oh, God, that texting is distracting me. I'm sorry. Click, 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 click. It's freaking me out. Mostly because I can't do it that fast, All right. So yeah, I don't think that it applies to your factual claim as much, and it just seems like it's sort of the what's the phrase, boilerplate stuff on this issue. All right. Thank you.